Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. I am back today, solo episoding again. So, if you're a regular listener, you'll know I soloed last week and I spoke all about maintenance, moving away from fat loss, setting up long term nutrition, things like that. And I'm going to flow straight on from last week's episode into today's episode. And one of the first things I'll say, I said this last week, was if you do not have a maintenance goal right now, or if you're not at the point of wanting to maintain and you're thinking, no, I definitely I'm nowhere near that. I don't want to keep working towards fat loss. Like I said last week, at some point, we're all going to reach this point if we have a successful fat loss phase. So even though it might not be applicable to you now, at some point it's going to be. And what I was saying in that episode last week is maintenance is not a phase or a short-term thing. It is the rest of our life. So this is something that we really need to learn how to do. And the biggest thing to catch there, like I said this in so many ways last week, but really in short and a summary, is really realizing that if we succeed with fat loss, then, quote, eating good and eating well no longer needs to be associated with fat loss. And for most people, that's just been the association for our whole life. And most of us have just kind of grown up that way. I eat good, I eat well. For some people, if there's a big weight loss goal, it's like to lose weight. Usually the subconscious thing or the unconscious thing, even if there isn't a weight loss goal, is like to keep my weight down or to get my weight down. And that's just always the association for so many people everywhere, is just eat well, weigh less. And if we think about doing that successfully, then we reach the point where it's like, okay, well, that can't be the plan anymore. That can't be the goal anymore because it doesn't make sense. There's only so much fucking weight we can lose. So it's so important to really intercept that. If you're at this point now, that's awesome. If you're, like I said, you've still got a long way to go on your fat loss journey. If that journey's successful, which let's assume it's going to be, especially like I said last week, if you're an Eat Like Ruby, at some point the plan and the goal and the focus has to change. And that's where maintenance comes in. And like I keep saying, it's not a phase. It's not a temporary thing. It's not like, let's say someone's in a healthy weight range. They don't want to eat for weight loss 9 months of the year and then just have a short little maintenance phase because they're already in a healthy weight range. Why do we pursue dropping that for 9 months of the year? It doesn't make sense. So really, maintenance is not this little short thing that we set up. Maintenance is where we eat for the rest of our life. So if you want to hear more about that, you can go back to last week's episode. But today I'm going to talk about my own nutrition, what it looks like when I move away from fat loss, what I think about, what I implement, how I set up my days, all of that sort of thing. And I said in last week's episode, a few people ask me like, do I find this phase hard or stressful or anything? Absolutely not. It's so insanely enjoyable for me. Like I absolutely love eating high calories. And what one person deems high and what another deems high is going to be two completely different things. But for me, if I think about doing fat loss on 1600 and now doing maintenance on 2400, like I said last week, why the fuck would I not want to eat 2400? Like, it's so enjoyable. I'm literally living my best life right now. So I absolutely love it. And that's probably a good place to start. I did go from my deficit calories of 1600 straight up to my maintenance calories of 2400. And the first thing I want to talk about there is if you're someone who's been following along for a long time with the pod or Insta or YouTube or anything, you'll know that I spent 10 weeks at the start of this year at maintenance. And I'll talk about that for a sec. So at the start of this year, literally from Jan 1st for 10 weeks, I ate at my maintenance intake for those whole 10 weeks, really like strictly and on point for like a purpose, for a reason. I really wanted to see how my body responded, learn if that truly was my maintenance, just see actually what happens there. And I spoke about last week how beneficial I think it is to have a phase of doing this at some point, to bring the same effort and energy and everything that we would bring to a fat loss goal to a tracked period at maintenance and really just see for yourself what happens. I think it's one thing for me to sit here and say, this is what happens when you eat at maintenance and da-da-da-da, but it's a whole nother thing to actually watch it play out. So I did that for 10 weeks at the start of this year. That intake was 2200, and I think at about the 5 or 6 week mark, I ramped it up to 2300 just because I was seeing my weight maintained for the most part, but measurements come down like a little bit, and I could just see in my pics and videos and stuff that I was a little bit leaner. So the whole point of that, like I said, was to truly see where my maintenance was and how my body responded to certain intakes. And the response to 2200 was like, oh, there might be a little bit more room to creep this up. So I went into the 23s. And I sat there for a while, and then I actually went into my surplus and my gaining phase, which was more like 27 or 28. And I was a little bit loose with some meals out and stuff in that. So I feel like my actual average intake in my gaining phase would have been like probably around the 3,000, just under mark. So that's just a little insight into my own nutrition and numbers and everything. And then obviously my fat loss phase that I just did from July 1st until the end of September was on around 1,600. I lost about 8 kilos. And obviously I've wrapped that up now and moved back into maintenance, and I moved straight to 2,400. So the reason for that is because obviously I had pretty good feedback from the start of the year that I could maintain on 2,300, but I feel like my energy output is slightly higher right now, just a little bit higher. My steps around that time at the start of the year were about 10,000, and now they're about 12 to 13. So I just feel like I'm moving a bit more. I'm a bit more active, and I just felt like there was room to just give that a little bit of a nudge. And like I said last week, quote, worst case scenario, for lack of a better word, is that I hit that intake for a few weeks and then I realize that it's not my maintenance and I bring it back slightly. So I think we need to remove that fear of like, what if I hit at maintenance and I don't maintain? Then we adjust. Like, what if? It's actually not the end of the world. So for me, like I said, I've gone to the 2,400. It's so enjoyable. I absolutely love it. But my goal right now, I don't have a goal for fat loss or muscle gain or anything at all, like nothing aesthetic, nothing body composition focused, but I like to have the tracked period at maintenance out the back of the deficit. I don't like to just swing out of a deficit into like being super flexible, untracked, really loose, because I think it can just be a little bit too chill for some people, and we can be a little bit too flexible and snacky and all of these things, which can be fine at times. But I think it's a really common theme to have the successful deficit. Come out of that, be a little bit too chill, a little bit too flexible, find ourselves in a position that we don't want to be in. And like I said last week, people can then form that mentality of, I feel like shit at maintenance, I only feel good in the deficit. And it's like, you didn't really feel like shit at maintenance because you weren't eating at maintenance. You were just eating whatever the fuck you wanted. So very important to clock the difference between that, because people really start to demonize maintenance, or like we mentioned, get into that mentality of like, quote, maintenance didn't work for me. Were you actually at maintenance, or were you being way more chilled? And again, there's times for chilled phases, but we can't get the two confused. And I think that that's what people need to think about. And then for myself, I pretty much wrapped up my fat loss phase at the end of September. Like, we did our photo shoot on the 26th or 27th, whatever that was, and then basically rolled straight into October. So when I looked at October for myself, I've got a few things on in terms of, we've actually got the Eat Like Ruby retreat. When this episode comes out, the retreat would have been and gone, but we've got that next week, which is so exciting. Retreat Like Ruby. This weekend I'm going camping, which again, by the time this episode comes out, it would have been like 3 weeks ago. But I had a few little things like that. But also am super mindful that, like, I'm going to maybe talk about this a little bit more later on, but just because you have something on doesn't mean you have to eat like a fuckwit. Like, I feel like so many people need to clock this, because I think people straight away go, oh my God, like, I want to eat at maintenance, but I've got an event. Don't instantly make the connection that because you've got an event, an occasion, a meal out, etc., you have to eat like an idiot, and or it has to be high calorie. It absolutely can be at times, and whatever, like, that's a whole nother convo. But I think people instantly make that assumption of like, I've got something on outside of my routine. It's going to mess up all of my nutrition and my whole dieting practice. Why? Why do we, like, that's so important to catch. And that kind of brings me to a little topic that I had in my notes. I didn't know whether to talk about it last week or this week, but I ran out of time last week, so we'll talk about it right now. I think so many people come into, quote, maintenance, but not really when we look at this, and play it safe with the intake they go to in case they want to have high calorie days. And if you're feeling attacked right now, you're not alone. This is so insanely common. I see this so much. And to me, this is a big red flag. Personally, if we think about myself going from 1,600 to 2,400, she's not playing it safe. And I'm not quote, banking calories, saving calories, calorie cycling, playing it safe, creating a buffer. People use all of these sayings or these quotes, and I think sometimes, certain quotes might make us feel a little bit better about it. But I think anytime this is done, it's done in a somewhat restriction and or scarcity mindset, if we think about that. And if we think about someone who has had a whole life of shitty restrictive dieting, whatever, if we can have success with an actual positive fat loss phase, and then we move to maintenance and we want to settle in there for the long term, we don't want to carry scarcity and restriction into that. If you've had a whole life of doing that, the whole point of maintenance, obviously there's big physical benefits to eating at maintenance, but we don't want to carry a restrictive dieting mindset into maintenance. And especially if we think about maintenance being eating for the rest of our life, do we want to restrict and have scarcity and fear around food for the rest of our life? No, thanks. So what I'm getting at there is, I think so many people calculate their maintenance, or maybe they calculate it, maybe they have a bit of an idea of what it is or whatever, and then they scale back a little bit. And they're like, oh, okay, if I use my own numbers for an example, had fat loss on 1600, my maintenance is around 23 or 24, I'm going to eat at 2000 in case I want to have a high calorie weekend, in case I want to go and do X, Y, Z, in case something comes up. In my opinion, and obviously we can calorie cycle. I speak about this a little bit in the fat loss phase. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of calorie cycling. And really my reason is, in my opinion, we want to eat as much food every day as we can. I'm the biggest fan of eating as much food every day as we can, mostly for the reason of what we call energy availability. And this is a whole nother topic. I've thought about doing a YouTube or a podcast about this, but basically what energy availability is, it's a big thing that we study and look at in sports nutrition, and especially with athletes. It's something I'm talking about heaps with Shaq. It's essentially how much energy does the body have available to function and do everything it needs to do once it's used its energy towards training. And I don't want to get too off topic, but just to sort of put into context and explain this a little bit, the reason we look at this in sports nutrition is if you think about someone with a big training schedule, big energetic demands, like an athlete that's doing a lot, if they're on a restrictive diet, yet they're doing a fuck ton of training, there's fuck all energy left for the body to just function and thrive and do its thing. If we think about the organs needing calories are energy. So the organs need energy to literally keep going. And this is what our metabolism is. So if we sort of pull all this apart and break it down, if someone's on a really low calorie diet, but they're doing a lot, there's not a lot of energy left for the body to thrive and be in an optimal state and do its thing. And this is what energy availability is. And when we look at energy availability, such a mouthful, usually we call it EA. But people will have what we call low EA, so low energy availability. We have optimal EA, so optimal energy availability. And that's something that we assess with athletes is are you in a low EA state? Are you in an optimal EA state? Because if you're asking your body to do a lot, how is your body actually functioning and going behind the scenes? So bringing that back to my own nutrition and calorie cycling, in my opinion, I think I want to give my body as much energy as I can every day within reason. Obviously, we're going to hit a point there where it's gotten too much energy, it spills over to a surplus. That's a whole nother topic. That's a whole nother thing. But really, we're all going to have an edge where maintenance ends and the surplus starts. In my opinion, why would we not eat at that edge? If there's a fat loss goal, we get in the deficit, we achieve fat loss, we get out of it. And this is one of the main reasons I talk about fat loss being so short, sharp, direct, all the things, because I think I don't want to spend one extra day with low energy coming into my body than I need to. So that's why I love fat loss being so short, sharp, and intentional like that. As soon as I come out of it, I'm not tiptoeing back up to maintenance. I'm not reverse dieting, as people say, whole nother topic. I'm not going, oh, my maintenance is 2,400, but I'll eat at 2,000 to play it safe, create a buffer. Maybe I want a high weekend, whatever. I'm like, no, this body that I asked to do 12,000 steps every day, hit the gym 4 times a week, run a fucking company, do all these things for me, I'm going to energize it. I'm going to fuel it. And I think so many people really need to think about that, because kind of ties into what I said last week, where maintenance is the rest of our life. It's not a phase. It's not a short-term thing. think about your body and your health and all the things that you want it to do, like physically with training and steps and all of that, but just in your everyday life. Look after it, fuel it, give it energy, give it all the things. Stop thinking, how much do I need to eat to maintain my weight and not get fat? And start thinking, how can I fuel my body as best I can? How can I look after my body? You know that body that I asked to do fucking 12,000 steps every day? Yeah, maybe I'll look after it in return. Like, there needs to be a massive mindset shift here, because I think so many people are just, like I said, in that scarcity restriction mindset where it's like, I want to have the buffer. I want to play it safe. I don't want to go too far. Flip it and think, if you don't want to go too far in terms of, I don't want to eat too much and quote, get fat, think about it from the other angle and go, I don't want to go too far where this body that I'm asking to do all this stuff, I'm still fucking restricting the amount of energy I give it to do it. Really flip that and think about too far in the opposite direction. How far are you going with keeping restrictions, scarcity, all of that in place, even though you're looking at how you want to eat for the rest of your life? So I'm so off topic, but I wanted to get that in there because that's why I personally don't like to calorie cycle or do low days or anything like that. I think if I know my body can maintain on 2,400, why would I not give it that every single day? And something that I said in there was, so many people want to scale back the intake in the week in case I want to have a high weekend or do XYZ on the weekend. I think you need to look at that and go, why don't I trust myself to implement moderation on the weekends or at events or wherever it is that you think you need to save calories for? And again, that's not to say that we can't go out and have a higher calorie meal or we can't do a little bit of calorie cycling or whatever. But I think there's a difference between just occasionally having a bigger meal or structuring your week to suit something like that versus living in scarcity in case I have these big days. I think you know which one you're in. So if it's that second one, like I said, stop looking at how can I cut back in the week and start looking at how can I learn better habits for events, occasions, meals out, etc. They don't have to be blowouts. They don't have to be big high calorie things. We can stop halfway through a meal. We don't have to get entrees and mains and desserts and all these things. We absolutely can. Like I said, I'm a huge fucking fan of the high calories. But I think so many people are like, well, if I'm going out, I'm going all in. So the best thing I can do is bank calories all week for that. Stop banking calories in the week and start addressing the weekend problem, in my opinion. So that's why I personally like to avoid the calorie cycling. I shouldn't say avoid, but not implement calorie cycling, especially on a regular basis. And then coming back to what I was actually saying about October, I think that's where I was going. When I looked at my month of October, I had camping weekend, I had retreat weekend. I don't think I had too much else on, but I've also still just been doing like the odd meal or things here and there. So when I step back and look at that, I was like, okay, well, if we have a month of 30 or 31 days and I've got 4 or 5 events on, first of all, there's 25 days where I can eat 2,400 calories, tick all the boxes of nutrition and fucking feel great. And then there's 4 or 5 other days where I can still tick boxes, carry over habits from everything I've learned about nutrition and still enjoy meals out or events or anything in moderation. And we speak about this so much in the fat loss phase and in Eat Like Ruby with enjoying meals out. We want to enjoy those meals out. And I think the way we do so is in moderation and mindfulness. And that's a whole nother topic. If you're in the fat loss phase, definitely listen to those. But I think when we approach meals out or events or occasions with kind of fear and restriction and scarcity and all those things, it's no different than just living in a restrictive diet for the rest of our life, which is not something I think we should be doing. So for me personally, just looking at that month, I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to nail my 2,400 calorie days. I'm going to literally just go off and enjoy the meal, the occasion, whatever for what it is, and then come back to those habits all the time. And again, when we step back and look over a month of doing that, that's a wicked month. And if we think about everything I spoke about last week, where maintenance is going to be a range, like the intake's going to be a range, the weight is going to be a range, all of those things, because we're a human being with ebbs and flows and peaks and troughs and all of that. This is part of that. So again, if I think about going out and enjoying meals, let's say, like I said, I approach those meals with moderation and mindfulness. I approach that whole day by applying certain habits, ticking boxes, going out and enjoying that meal, going straight back to my normal habits the next day. let's say even if those days happen to be a little bit higher calorie, sometimes they might be lower calorie because if you're not tracking, you don't even know. So let's say they're a little bit different. But again, we step back and we look at the week as a whole and the month as a whole. The average intake is going to be really consistent and it's going to balance out pretty closely to 2,400. If you've hit that 25 days out of 30, and then on the other 5 days, you've been moderate and mindful, maybe a little bit under, maybe a little bit over, your overall average is going to be very on point. So that's what I love to think about. And if we bring that back to the convo from last week about weight and intake at maintenance both being a range, you might wake up the day after a meal out and see a bit of a spike on the scale because of sodium, carb intake, fluid intake, food mass, anything like that. But then again, you get back to your usual habits, you watch things level out. And again, we step back over the month. The weight has had its ebbs and flows, the intake has had its ebbs and flows, but the overall averages and trends in these things is very consistent. That is maintenance. That is literally maintenance. And I think that's so important to think about because like I said last week, I think people can get a little bit caught up in exact numbers and, oh my God, if I eat this, then do I eat less the next day and rah, rah, rah. Your body's not sitting there going, 1,900 calories, 1901, 1902, shit, 1903, there's the surplus. Start packing on the weight. Like there's always energy coming in and out of the body. And if we're pretty consistently bringing it back to the moderate, enjoyable intake where it holds steady, aka maintenance, then those ebbs and flows are going to almost come out in the wash and things are just going to remain quite neutral. So I think that that's a really important thing to think about and learn. And if we sort of tie in everything I've said last week and this week, if I've come out of my deficit, which was really strict and low calorie, onto what I know to be my maintenance intake, and I hit that pretty consistently, and then I also make the assessment like I spoke about last week where we monitor things, we assess it over time. If I see that moving, if I get to the end of October and I'm like, I'm like 64 or 65 kilos and my pics are looking a little fluffy, for lack of a better word. We know I hate the word fluffy. Measurements have gone up, anything like that. If we step back and make that assessment and we're like, okay, with the ebbs and flows, there's also an upwards trend, then that's not maintenance. There's an indication there that we're slightly gaining. If we step back and we assess, okay, cool, there's ebbs and flows, but overall, there's no clear trend down or clear trend up, that's maintenance. And that's really what we're looking at. It's not, what did I eat yesterday? Fuck, what did I weigh then? Today, what should I eat today as a result? How do I balance it all out? It's stepping back and saying, how do I balance it out over time on a consistent basis? And again, that ties in with eating for the rest of my life. I don't want to live like this robot that's doing one thing one day, so I have to do something else the next, and like making everything fucking add up. If you can find your sweet spot and spend most of your time there and then implement moderation and mindfulness on the other events and occasions, step back overall. That is literally maintenance. That is life. Like I said, for myself, I am tracking at 2,400, enjoying the events and occasions as they are. And one thing that I like to do here, there's a few little things that have kind of come up for me in the last few weeks, and I'm like, oh, that'd be cool to talk about on the pod. I like to plan my week or my day. Like I'll usually plan my Monday and stick with that for a few days. And then as I go towards the end of the week, I might mix up a meal or whatever. And in my MyFitnessPal, I've got all the meals saved that I also use in Eat Like Ruby. So if you're in Eat Like Ruby, especially like Fat Loss Phase, and we've got all of the like meal guides and meal ideas and stuff, they're all saved in my MyFitnessPal. So it's super handy. And as a little bit of a side note, I don't know if it's too early to say this, but I'll just say it anyway. This is something that we are going to have for sale in Eat Like Ruby soon. So if you're not in one of these big programs, but you would just love to buy like our meal guide and get all our meal ideas, stay tuned. But what I'm getting at there is, if I've planned my day and I'm ticking boxes and life's good, and then I get towards the end of the week and think like, oh, I want to mix something up. If my dinner is roughly 500 calories and 35 grams of protein, I can literally just look through my meals and go, what else do I know to be roughly 500 calories and 35 grams of protein? Roughly. And then you can literally just sub one of them out, sub another one in. And I think so many of my experienced Eat Like Ruby girls eat this way without even realizing it. Like your mind just starts to go like, oh, I've got X amount of calories left for dinner. I need to hit X amount of protein. I need to get some fiber. What foods and meals do I know fill those gaps or would slot in nicely there? that's literally why I'm such a fan of nutrition education, because I think your mind just starts to work like that, and it's awesome. So that's sort of, to me, that's where the sweet spot is, with consistent enough that I haven't just spiraled out of the deficit and am eating whatever the fuck I want and moving in a direction I don't want to go as a result of that, but coming to my maintenance intake, but still having a lot of enjoyment and flexibility. Like I said, 2,400 calories is so enjoyable to me off the back of 1,600, but then also just being able to tweak things like that and being like, yeah, cool, I loved my meal plan that I made for this week for a few days. Now I'm going to sub the dinner out, sub another one in. Going to sub the breakfast out, sub another one in. That's a cool little thing to think about. I don't think there's a right or wrong with this, but I think it's something to look at if you're doing it one way and it's not working for you. What I'm talking about is, I'm personally a huge fan of planning big, box-ticking, satisfying meals, especially when you are at maintenance. I don't like the idea of going to maintenance and bringing in a fuck ton of random little snacks that don't really contribute to like health or nutrients, but also aren't satisfying. Like, we know I'm all about flexible dieting. Not everything has to be health and nutrients, but I even see people do this in a deficit and it blows my freaking mind, but no right or wrong. But so often people will include things like, I think it's like Coles has that no sugar chocolate, like 2 squares of no sugar chocolate and a little bag of tiny teddies and a little thing of pizza shapes and so many random little snacky, like 100-calorie foods. And I think people bring these things in and then an hour later, they're like, I'm hungry. And it's like, yeah, because you're not eating big, satisfying, enjoyable meals. You're not getting nutrients. There's not a lot of satiety. Like, it's quite a quick fix cravings thing. And like I said, I don't think these things are wrong and should be avoided. But for me, when I look at maintenance, I'm not bringing in random little snacky foods. I'm like bulking up big, delicious, tasty meals. And it's so satisfying. Like, one of the biggest benefits I've found from moving to maintenance in the last 2 weeks is such a huge reduction in food focus and a huge increase in enjoyment and satiety and satisfaction of food. And it's funny because I didn't realize that these things were a bit shitty towards the end of my deficit. Like, I could tell I was getting a little bit over it because I think it had been about 14 weeks in the end. So I could tell I was getting a little bit over it, but I knew that the end was quite close. So I didn't really care. But then as soon as I went to maintenance, I was just like, fuck, my food focus has come right down. And my satisfaction from food is so much better. Like, I would have a meal and just be like, that was awesome. Like, that was unreal. And I'm going to have a little look at my MyFitnessPal. I mean, I could probably tell you this off the top of my head because I've eaten it every day for 2 weeks. But if I look at the meals and the foods that I've been doing, when I plan my day, I think about enjoyment, like what do I actually want to eat? I think about anything kind of not non-negotiable, anything like I definitely want in there. So if it's like pre-training or if I was definitely having a certain meal with Shaq or something like that, I always think like what definitely has to go in there, and then like enjoyment-wise, what do I actually want in there? And then I look like what is missing in terms of protein, fiber, whole grains, calcium, fruit, veg, anything like that. And like, side note, doing that on 2,400 calories, significantly easier than doing it on 1,600. So people asking me which one I enjoy more, that's where the answer is. But what I've been doing, like my day of eating, is I've been having a mocha at some point. If you know, you know. I literally love skinny mochas. They are like my favorite thing in the world. Sometimes I get takeaway, sometimes I make it at home. Just depends what I'm up to, but that is one of the highlights of my day. So skinny mocha, around 200-ish calories. I've been having the Eat Like Ruby bowl, we all know. So Chobani yogurt, one of the first things I do when I go from low calories to high is go to like the full of fat, like nicer yogurt, in my opinion. I think things like Chobani Fit, YoPro, whatever, like they've got their place when they need to, but when I've got the calories, I'm going to the one that I love. That raspberry lemonade one, I mentioned that on the pod before and everyone's been super influenced. The raspberry lemonade Chobani, absolutely on point. It says limited edition, but I feel like if we all buy it enough, they'll just keep it around for us. So I've been having that, 100 grams of raspberries, 100 grams of strawberries, 40 grams of cereal, and 35 grams of Nutella. That is a nice dirty big serve of Nutella. And that meal is so like big volume satisfying. That is literally all my favorite foods in one bowl. It's sweet. I love sweet food. We all know this. So that meal is so satisfying. It's got 21 grams of protein. It's got, let me have a quick little look. It's got 12 grams of fiber. Like, it's such a box ticking meal in terms of calcium, fruit, fiber, whole grains, protein. Such a box ticker. I could talk about it all day. That's why I eat it every single day. But that's one of my meals. For another meal, I've just been having a turkey and salad sandwich. Again, so nice, so satisfying, filling. It's like wholemeal bread, avocado, salad, turkey, cheese. I put like Nando's Perinese sauce on it. It's just under 400 calories, but satisfying and delicious. And again, ticks boxes, whole grains, calcium, fiber, veggies, all the things. I've been having pre-training, guys, my side note, pre-training meal at the moment, wholemeal fruit toast with jam. I can't imagine I'm going to go to any other pre-training meal for a long time because I'm absolutely loving this one. So wholemeal fruit toast, I just got it from Woolies. Jam, so filling, so satisfying. I think it's just under 400 calories. Where is it? Obviously higher carb, great in the system before training. And the whole meal is just like a little serve of whole grains, which is great. Taco bowl for dinner, so lean beef mince, the organic plain corn chips from Woolies, so good, so good. 40 grams of those, cheese, like taco seasoning, veggies, kidney beans, sour cream, cheese, like, again, such a delicious meal. Ticks boxes, filling. I look forward to it. I love it. And then I've been having 3 rows of chocolate for dessert. 3 rows, 75 grams, 370 calories of chocolate for dessert. And it's great. But if we look back across that day, and side note, I've been doing Darryl Lee chocolate. That is so good. There's one that's like choc brownie, and I think one that's like raspberry something. I don't know. I'll put it on my stories. But it's unreal, and it's delicious. It's so satisfying. I'm not a fan of like 2 squares of chocolate. It's 3 rows or nothing for me. But again, I wouldn't even, like, I wasn't including shit like that in my deficit. So that's like, there's a time and place in my opinion. But that's my day. Like, coffee, I absolutely love. Big filling eat like Ruby bowl. Big filling meat and salad sanger. Big pre-training carbs. Big taco bowl for dinner. Delicious chocolate for dessert. Like, what an enjoyable day. I love it. And then I just want to read that out because I love the foods. And if you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen most of them. But then anytime I want to mix that up, like I said, it might just be like, oh, I don't have the stuff for taco bowls. What else in my meals is similar? What can I make that's similar? What do I feel like? And then anytime I want to eat out, even the other week, Jing and I went out for toasties. If you live on the sunny coast, you know Criminal has the nicest toasties. They're so good. And I estimate them to be so crazy high in calories because they're just so fatty, but they're so great. But when I do something like that, I'll literally just take out one of the meals because I'm like, okay, well, I'm having this big toasty. So it comes in for one of the meals and I'll take out the chocolate because it's like, okay, if I've had a way higher calorie meal than I normally would, I'll bring that in place of one of the meals and then I'll remove another 300 calories from my day because I don't need to have chocolate every day as nice as it is. And it's like, I don't know exactly how it adds up. I don't know where it leaves me for the day. But again, if we think about doing that once a week on an otherwise really consistent week or consistent month, that's going to balance out really nicely in terms of our overall intake and where we're sitting. So I just think that's cool to think about. And one thing you guys would have heard me talk about before, and if you're in Eat Like Ruby, you definitely would have heard me talk about this, but it is the sweet spot. I speak so much about finding a sweet spot. I think when we're in a deficit and the goal is fat loss, we want to find a sweet spot where we're achieving that, but it's achievable, it's sustainable, it's doable for the most part. I think anything we're in, even if it's like a muscle gain phase, we want to find the sweet spot where we're gradually gaining, moving in that direction, but we haven't pushed it too far. There's always going to be a sweet spot. And I think only you can really know where that is for yourself, because if we think about someone pushing a fat loss phase, there are going to be people that can push it a bit harder and be a bit more aggressive and endure things a little bit more within reason. Whereas some people are like, no, I don't want to push that hard. So my sweet spot is scaled back a little bit. And then other people's sweet spot's like, no, I want to ramp it up a little bit. So only you can really know. And I think we do know. Sometimes we kind of outsource it and we ask questions and we're like, oh my God, where's my maintenance? And what if I gain weight? And what if I this? What if I that? Do the work, assess how you feel, and really just ask, is this my sweet spot? if I look at the actual assessments and the tangibles and the facts and everything, is the feedback telling me that I'm sitting in the position I want to be in, whether that's fat loss, muscle gain, maintenance, whatever? Is the actual factual feedback telling me that I'm achieving the thing I want to achieve? And then how am I feeling when I do so? And it can be a bit of a juggling act, and these things might change over time. You might be like, yeah, feedback's awesome and I'm feeling good. A few weeks later, feedback's stalled. I need to ramp it up a notch. A few weeks later, feedback's really fucking solid, but I'm feeling too taxed, too intense, so I need to scale back a bit. The sweet spot will move, and you always just want to be able to assess and adjust. And this is why I'm such a big fan of nutrition education, because I think when we're not educated, we do outsource this straight away. We're like, oh my God, this happened. What do I do about it? The more you know about nutrition and your own nutrition, how does my body respond to certain things? How do I navigate certain things? Where's the sweet spot for me? You can make these assessments and adjustments at any time, and maintenance is no different. I think I've watched people succeed so well at fat loss, get to maintenance and act like they've got no fucking idea what to do. I think what's happening there is such a history and such conditioning of, like I said last week, eating good means scale weight goes down, fat loss, all of these things. We're so used to being in a fat loss, weight loss mindset that we're not used to the maintenance mindset. So we're not willing to be like, hang on, everything I learned in the deficit, I could apply over here with the other goal, with the goal being to maintain. I think people kind of go to shit and then they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And it's like, yes, you do. You're just scared to do it because you've been conditioned to think that the best way to eat is for fat loss, and eating good means for fat loss. And anytime we're on point with our nutrition, it's for fat loss. What if we carried over all the habits, all the learnings, all the beliefs, every single thing, but with the goal of maintenance instead? And again, thinking about everything I've said, not just thinking about maintaining my weight or maintaining my body composition, but how do I want to maintain my nutrition to eat for the rest of my life? So, side note, away from my own nutrition, but again, important thing to say. And some of the last little things I want to say before I wrap this one up is, when we do think about long-term nutrition and maintenance and all the things I've been talking about for the last few weeks, I kind of want to speak to two different people here. If you're a gym girl that really likes to do the phases and have the different goals and work towards different things, that's awesome. We know I'm all for it. I've built my whole company around that, right? It's wicked. So if you like to knuckle down, do a bit of fat loss at times, and then maybe do muscle gain at times, or just go to maintenance and focus on performance training, all those things at times, that's wicked. And that can be a really awesome way to structure your year, where, like we've spoken about so many times, you do have that short, sharp, intentional fat loss phase. And then the rest of the time, you're either maybe in a surplus if you want to pursue muscle gain, or you're up in maintenance, making sure you're eating enough, fueling, training, and everything. That is awesome. And if you like to rotate through that for ages, like for years, that's wicked. The other little thing to say with that, and it kind of segues into the other group I was talking about, if you are a gym girl that's like, I knuckle down once a year and pursue fat loss, and then the rest of the time I eat at maintenance, and I start to practice a bit more flexibility, move into untracked meals, have some time away from tracking, etc. And then as I come around, maybe to like summer's coming again, or in the new year, start of the year, whatever, if you have that one window every year where you're like, okay, I'm knuckling back down on fat loss, and then the rest of the time you go through what I just said, maintenance, and it gets a bit chill and flexible and whatever, and you come back to your time you want to do fat loss and you think like, oh, I went a little bit too far, a couple of kilos, or I'm feeling a little bit, quote, fluffy, whatever. This is not a bad thing. This is not a wrong thing. I think so many people think if I've done fat loss and then I go to maintenance, I should just maintain for the rest of my life. And if I can't, I've failed. We can absolutely go to maintenance and sit there forever. I'm not saying we can't do that. But what I'm saying is, it is natural to be a human being that has other things come up in their life, or prioritizes other things, or just gets a little bit fucking chilled and goes out for dinner a few too many times, or a few more times than normal, or whatever, for a few weeks, and then comes back around to a time where you're like, oh, I am feeling a little bit off. I'm just going to knuckle back down in a deficit for a while. And again, I think we know if we're doing this in a healthy, moderate way, or are you yo-yoing? Because there's a difference. If you're doing this once a year where you're just like, oh, I tighten things up once a year, that can be great. if you are constantly yo-yoing, like, oh, I went to maintenance, sat there for 2 weeks, felt like shit, ran back to the deficit, stayed there for a little while, went back to maintenance, and it's very frantic and scattered and you're feeling quite negative about it, that's a very different thing than someone who spends most of their year out of a deficit living their best life and then just knuckles down for a few months. So again, don't overthink it and don't be like, which one am I? You know. And that, like I said, kind of segues into that other category I was going to talk about. If you're not a gym girl or you don't really love this shit, you don't love training, and you definitely don't have the interest in like the muscle gain and that sort of thing, same thing. If you knuckle down once a year and tighten things up to feel good for summer or feel good in the new year after Chrissy, anything like that, and then you just go into like a moderate mindful approach for majority of the year, and then you come around to that same time and then you think, oh, I want to tighten things up again. Again, this is not a bad thing. This is not a wrong thing. And again, you know, if it's like, I diet really hard and then I fucking go to shit and feel like shit, versus I tighten things up for a while and then I'm pretty chill for a while. So there is a difference, but I think most people know what category they fall in. But if you're someone who is falling into that positive category, like I'm saying, whether it's as a gym girl or it's just as like an everyday person that's like, I tighten things up for a while, I feel really great for summer, Chrissy, holidays, all of that. I chill through the winter. I'm mindful of all the stuff I've learned. I'm mindful of all my habits, but maybe it's like that 2 to 3 kilo, 4 kilo buffer, whatever. And then when summer's coming around again, I get that off and I go again. If you did that for 10 years, I think people can see that as like a fail, whereas really that could be maintenance. Your maintenance could be like, I rotate through that little 4 kilo window every year. Every time I come towards summer, I want to get a couple of kgs off. I keep them off for a while. They slowly creep back on and then I get them off again the next summer. That's not a bad thing. But again, if it's happening in a scattered, frantic, negative, yo-yo, restriction, crazy energy, then it is. So it's more so about the mindset and how you're feeling about things. And even if we think about, if you've been following for a long time, this was kind of me last year in 2023, because I was like, yeah, I'm just going to spend the year at maintenance, not do any really big goals or anything. And then when Shaq and I decided to get married, I love how I say decided to get married, I was just like, oh, I'm just going to tighten things up. And really that was like, oh, I'd had, say, from like January through to September-ish, I'd just been chilling and mindful of habits, moderation, protein, fruit, veggies, fiber, all the shit we talk about, but not strict tracking, not a strict goal, just a nice sweet spot like I talk about. But then when I thought about like, oh, okay, in terms of wedding, I'd like to just tighten things up. And then I went into a moderate deficit, did that for about 10-ish weeks, and then got married. Happy days. So the reason I bring that up is because, like I said, we can absolutely do those big intentional phases if you want to get after specific goals. And like I said, you can also get to a point where you want to maintain and literally hang there forever. But there is that little bit of a gap in between where, like I said, I think people have shamed themselves for kind of just relaxing and then being like, oh, now I need to tighten things up. Can it be okay that maybe once a year we get a little bit more tight, a little bit more strict? Again, if it's done in a really positive energy, and we have girls that come into the fat loss phase. I have girls that come into the fat loss phase in that final round of the year every year for this reason. They're like, yep. And most of them do training with me, like they'll train with me all year and they just manage their own nutrition. They're quite chill, life's good. And then when they get to September, they're like, okay, I would just want to have a few more strict weeks, knuckle down, get shit on point before the festive season gets here. That can be so positive, empowering, and awesome. So don't see that as a fail or a negative or a bad thing, is what I'm getting at. I feel like I have rambled enough about maintenance, but I also feel like I have a lot more to say. So I might touch on this again in the next few weeks, or I might do a Q&A. Sometimes the Q&As make me more triggered than motivated, but we'll see. I'll see when I listen back to these eps if there's anything that comes up that I think I want to touch on even more. But if you haven't listened to last week's, definitely do so. And like I said, whether you're maintaining now or this is something that you're going to work towards at a later date, this is something that we're all going to want to think about at some point. So it's a massive topic. And if we think about, shitty challenges and restrictive diets and all those things, no one is teaching how to eat for life. no one is teaching, okay, cool, well, if I do your program that's supposed to be fucking awesome, how do I eat for the rest of my life? There's a massive gap there and a massive thing there. So I think there's a lot more to say about this and a lot more to think about with this, but I hope these episodes were a good place to start. And the last thing I'll say there is if you do have a fat loss goal, we are about to open up the Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase again, which is so exciting. And if you are thinking fat loss in the new year and or you're thinking about doing the next Eat Like Ruby fat loss phase, stay tuned for the podcast in the next few days, or stay tuned to the podcast in the next few days, I should say, because we are dropping something very juicy, very awesome, very exciting, very discounted, if you will, for anyone thinking about their New Year's fat loss phase. So stay tuned. Like always, guys, like, download, reshare, tag, do all of the things. We have so much to come on the pod for the rest of the year and especially in 2025. So the more you guys can share it and tag it and show me that you love it, the more I can keep shit coming. And we can just keep getting after it for the back half of the year and in 2025. But that is all for me today. Thank you so much for listening. And I will be back not even next week, sooner than next week. So stay tuned.